I found her! I found her! An ambulance! An ambulance!
Stay here.
Someone call 911.
Hello, and welcome back to Manifesto. This is the third episode in the Day After Christmas series, where we are going back to the very beginning of the case and systematically examining the statements and the behaviors of the Ramseys on that very first day of the investigation. Let's get rolling right away and return to the crime scene. In the previous episode, we broke down and analyzed the statements and actions made by Mr. Ramsey in the minutes after he discovered JonBenet. Today, we will turn the spotlight to Patsy Ramsey's behavior and the statements she made subsequently after her husband's discovery of their daughter in the basement. So, let's begin and reset the scene. From Detective Linda Arndt's police report, we learn that around noon, Patsy Ramsey relocated to the den, or the downstairs study, from the sunroom where she had been most of the day. Patsy lays down on this couch seen here in this crime scene photo. Her good friends Barbara Fernie and Priscilla White accompany her. Patsy asked me what we, i.e. the police, were doing to find her daughter. I told Patsy that we are attempting to locate Linda Hoffman Pugh, and that the FBI was involved in the investigation. Moving through the hour, Arndt reported, "At an unknown time between 12:30 to 1300 hours, I talked with Fleet White. She told Mr. White she needed his help to keep John Ramsey's mind occupied. After she spoke to Mr. White, she then moved into the kitchen and spoke with John Ramsey. I suggested to John Ramsey that he and Fleet White check the house from top to bottom to see if anything belonging to JonBenet had been taken or had been left behind. After I had spoken to John, he immediately went to the basement door. I saw Fleet White following John Ramsey. I then returned to the den area. The time was approximately 1300 hours, or 1 p.m. As soon as Ramsey and White go to the basement, less than a minute later at 1:01 p.m., Arndt received a page to phone the Boulder Police Department. She moved to the kitchen and tried to return the call with one of the cellular phones that was in the kitchen. When there was no answer, Linda Arndt returned to the den. It is now just before 1:05 p.m. Ramsey and White are still in the basement looking for clues, and in the den, we have Patsy Ramsey with her friends, Barbara Fernie and Priscilla White, along with Detective Arndt, who has just returned from the kitchen. If you have been watching or listening, or just half following along, the scene is about to pick up with a lot of moving pieces and parts, so it is now vitally important for you to try and immerse yourself into the center of this situational crime scene. Inside 755 15th Street, Patsy Ramsey is on the couch in the den. At this moment in time, on the face of it, Patsy believes her daughter is just missing, and is praying and holding on to all hope of getting JonBenet back into her arms. The time is now 1:05 p.m. John opens the cellar door and discovers JonBenet in the basement. And then,
I found her! An ambulance! An ambulance!
Stay here.
Someone call 911.
I think that clip from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town does an excellent job capturing the chaos of the moment. Fleet White, reacting naturally to the situation, sprints up the stairs yelling, "We found her, I found her, we need an ambulance. Someone call 911, hurry, hurry." For more, let's return to the detective's report. At 13:05 hours, I saw Fleet White run from the area of the basement door to the den. I heard some type of shout or scream before I saw Mr. White. I saw Fleet White grab the phone in the den, dial 2 to 3 numbers, then hang up the phone. He then ran back towards the basement door. Fleet White yelled for someone to call an ambulance. I followed Mr. White to the basement door. The door to the basement was wide open. I was standing in the hallway facing the door to the basement when I saw John Ramsey coming up the final 3 or 4 stairs. John was carrying a young girl in his arms. Arndt instructed Mr. Ramsey to lay her down on the carpet in the foyer and told him to call 911 and then go to Patsy. However, Mr. Ramsey doesn't call 911. Instead, approximately 2 minutes later, he returns to the living room by the Christmas tree where Arndt had moved JonBenet and covered her with a throw blanket that was lying on a chair in the living room. Shortly after Arndt had moved JonBenet to the living room, she heard a loud guttural moan and wail coming from the den area of the house. The noise sounded as though it came from a woman. So at this point, over 2 minutes have passed since Fleet White sounded the alarm, shooting himself up the stairs like a cannon, yelling and shouting, we found her, and we need an ambulance," as he raced to the den fumbling his fingers at the phone, which Patsy Ramsey most assuredly must have seen. Everyone inside the house, naturally, has rushed to the site of the chaos and commotion in the foyer by the front door. Everyone except one. Everyone except Patsy Ramsey. So, where was Patsy during this critical moment? After all, her daughter had been finally found. Let's dig deeper into the interviews and the personal accounts of the people who were there and experienced these moments in real time. The people who were present inside the home at this very moment in time were John and Barbara Fernie, Fleet and Priscilla White, the preacher Father Rawl, Detective Arndt, and of course, the Ramseys. From Detective Steve Thomas's book, Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation. The panicked Fleet White ran up the stairs, grabbed a telephone and punched in a few numbers, then hung up. He ran back towards the basement yelling for someone to call an ambulance, as if he had forgotten a detective was standing right there. Patsy Ramsey was in the den with her friends, and when White shouted, Priscilla White and Barbara Fernie hurried toward the sound. Patsy did not move from the couch. Now, from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. While John Ramsey and others rushed back to the front of the house, Patsy sat for a moment on the couch in the rear of the house looking out a window. She did not move despite all of the shouting that JonBenet had been found. In the living room, John Ramsey grabbed a throw blanket off a chair and placed it over JonBenet. Next is from the book Foreign Faction by former lead investigator A. James Kohler. Arndt then picked up JonBenet and moved her to the living room, laying her on her back on a rug in front of the Christmas tree. Barbara Fernie and Priscilla White had been with Patsy Ramsey in the solarium when they heard Fleet shouting for an ambulance and moved from the room. Patsy did not accompany them. So the solarium here is a minor mistake because we know Patsy had relocated to the den with her friends about an hour earlier. Arndt and John Ramsey stood face to face over JonBenet, and he was told that she was gone. She then directed him to call 911. Ramsey left and returned approximately 2 minutes later, and before Arndt could stop him, he grabbed a blanket in the room and placed it over her body. Someone else placed a sweatshirt over JonBenet's feet. Not long thereafter, Patsy Ramsey was led from the den, supported in the arms of her friends, where she collapsed on her daughter's body. So now, roughly 3 minutes after that domino had fallen in the basement, Patsy Ramsey is about to make her entrance onto the scene, or some might say, and you're about to see, the stage. Patsy finally entered the living room flanked on both sides by her friends, Barbara and Priscilla. It was then and only then Patsy would finally run to her daughter and in front of everyone, fall to the floor draping herself, red turtleneck sweater and all, completely over top of JonBenet. In addition, from the case file, there is a statement made to the police by Patsy's good friend Barbara Fernie, who had returned to the den area to escort Patsy to the living room. The statement reads, Barbara Fernie thought it was strange that Patsy did not move initially when hearing the body, had been found. And from Detective Arndt's report, I saw Patsy Ramsey. It seemed as though Patsy was unable to walk without the assistance of someone holding her up. When they reached the living room and Patsy saw JonBenet's body, she immediately went to her and laid on top of her. Patsy was crying and moaning while she was with JonBenet. Patsy raised herself onto her knees, lifted her arms straight into the air, and prayed. Patsy said, "Jesus, you raised Lazarus from the dead. Raise my baby from the dead." We will get to this statement, or was it a prayer, in a moment. But for now, let's address the red flag that has been burning brighter than the sun minute after minute after minute before Patsy finally entered the room. To do this, let's rewind the scene to 3 minutes ago and start with the words Fleet White was yelling as he reached the first floor. "I found her, we found her, someone call an ambulance." He then ran straight for the den where most everyone was at the time, including Patsy, and tried to call 911. He dialed 2 or 3 numbers, then shouted for someone else to make the call, and then ran back towards the basement door. Now, at this very moment in time, if Patsy Ramsey, on the face of it, truly believed JonBenet had been taken from her home and was kidnapped by someone in the middle of the night, those words shouted by White should have made Patsy believe that her daughter had been found. She was no longer missing. She was home. And the calls for an ambulance should have given her the impression, hope even, for a moment that she was alive. JonBenet was back. But Patsy Ramsey didn't move a muscle. Patsy, choosing not to respond like everyone else did, immediately reacting, rising, and rushing to the side of the sound and shock of JonBenet's discovery, in my opinion, was a purposeful, calculated decision on her part. Furthermore, this wasn't just a 20 to 30 second delay, which may have been excusable and might have gone unnoticed during the chaos and confusion. Her delay, by all calculations, was at least 2.5 and more likely closer to 3 minutes in time before she would make her grand, startling entrance into the living room. But why? And for what good reason did Patsy purposely delay her response to the scene in the living room? In my analysis, I believe Patsy had a dire need to display in front of everyone in the house, her closest friends, the preacher, and maybe most of all, Detective Arndt, that her first sight of JonBenet laying on the floor in front of the Christmas tree was just that, her very first sight of her deceased daughter since the night before. Right now, at this moment, finding out, like everyone else, just after 1 p.m., and not 1 a.m., which I think was a lot more likely. If true, Patsy, possibly experiencing cognitive overload, contradicted her own performance, which was sabotaged by her 3 or so minute delay she took to arrive on the scene. If an unknown intruder somehow got caught up in a kidnapping gone bad scenario and had locked her in the wine cellar when the plan went amiss, we should have seen a more authentic response to the moment of discovery like everyone else.
I found her! I found her! An ambulance! An ambulance!
Stay here.
This is an important piece of evidence in this case that must not be understated. And it's the existence of this type of evidence that makes it highly unlikely this case will ever be solved in a court of justice. Patsy's dramatic cry out for JonBenet to be brought back from the dead like Lazarus from the Bible was also, in my opinion, contrived as well. If you believe Patsy had guilty knowledge of JonBenet's death before this moment, which I believe her statements and behavior show that she did, then raising her arms and shouting for Jesus to raise her daughter, like he did in the Bible for Lazarus, would have been all for show and effect. Patsy, by all accounts, was a woman of faith and religion, or at least she tried to be. She would have surely summoned the call for JonBenet to be brought back to life in the desperate moments after she knew her daughter had passed. Therefore, would obviously know that no amount of praying, a miracle, or anything else would ever bring back JonBenet. Patsy Ramsey literally spent most of her life perfecting the art of pageantry and performance, convincing and winning over others with her superfluous personality and charm. She had a special knack for acting in her own skits that she had written out with her own words and imagination. She was so good, in fact, she would win the talent competition in the 1978 Miss America pageant for playing the roles of two characters in a skit she had written just for the pageant. To say the least, Patsy Ramsey really knew how to put on a show. This is why the ransom note is 2.5 pages long, and the reason for Patsy's pauseful performance at the crime scene. And ultimately, this is why Patsy's personality is forever written into and all over the crime scene. Are you watching closely?
Patricia Ann Parr, Miss West Virginia.